There's a place on the coast of Egypt where the water is so clear, so calm, it feels completely harmless. Tourists float on the surface, snorkelers peer down into the blue. From above, it looks like paradise, but beneath that calm surface is a vertical shaft that drops straight into darkness. And once you enter it, the ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. This is the Dahab Blue Hole, and it's one of the deadliest dive sites on Earth. By official counts, more than 130 people have died here. Unofficial estimates place the number far higher. Many bodies were never recovered. Some were never even recorded. Today, we're going to uncover what really happens inside the Blue Hole. How experienced divers became disoriented, how seconds turned into fatal decisions, and why this place continues to claim lives despite its peaceful appearance. Conor O'Regan and Martin Gallagher, November 19, 1997. Conor O'Regan and Martin Gallagher were not thrill-seekers chasing records. They were young, recreational divers, 23 and 22 years old, diving together as friends. That morning, the conditions at the Blue Hole were ideal. The sea was calm, and visibility was nearly perfect for what they were about to do. They entered the water with a group of equally experienced divers. They were in the same tour group as our victims, being relaxed and confident, expecting a routine dive. They unfortunately headed for the last dive of their lives. The descent was slow and controlled. For the first several minutes, nothing felt wrong to the duo. Sunlight still reached them, and the visibility was still clear enough for them to keep going. Their breathing was steady as expected. At around 30 meters, however, nitrogen narcosis began its subtle work. Not panic, but comfort. A sort of quiet confidence, a sense that everything was fine. To those who don't know, you can think of nitrogen narcosis as being the same effect as being under the influence of alcohol. Somewhere between 40 and 50 meters, the group began to spread out. This wasn't alarming. It happens often, and divers usually regroup. But Conor and Martin drifted slightly deeper. At 52 meters, they saw the arch. To a sober mind, the arch is clearly a horizontal tunnel. But to a narcosis-affected brain, it looks like brightness, like a way out. Something you would see when looking at an entrance from inside of a dark cave. They swam toward it calmly, believing they were correcting a navigation error. Once beneath the arch, the depth increased faster than expected. Pressure crushed the air inside their buoyancy compensators, reducing lift. Their bodies became heavier with every meter. Their air gauges dropped rapidly now. At that depth, each breath consumed several times more gas than at the surface. At some point, likely around 70 to 80 meters, one of them realized they were sinking. But reaction time under narcosis is slow. Decisions feel distant. Movements feel delayed. There was nothing that could be done. Their movements were slowing down, and their reaction was as well. They sank more and more until eventually they sank past 90 meters. When their tanks finally ran dry, there was no explosive panic. At least that was what was inferred to happen. When their bodies were later found at 102 meters, the duo were found holding each other tightly. That detail matters. It meant they were aware. It means one reached for the other. It means they understood what was happening together. No rescue was launched in time because no one realized they were missing until the dive was already over. Barbara Dillinger, November 16th, 1998. Barbara Dillinger was 24 years old and highly disciplined. She had trained extensively for deep dives and approached the Blue Hole with focus, not bravado. Her plan was ambitious, a dive to approximately 112 meters. The descent went exactly as planned. Her movements were controlled. Her breathing was steady. At depth, she remained calm. The danger began on ascent. At extreme depths, ascent is not about speed, it's about patience. The body must pause repeatedly to allow nitrogen to safely leave the bloodstream. Something disrupted that process. It may have been a gas miscalculation. It may have been narcosis. It may have been a sudden, overwhelming sense that something was wrong. We didn't have information on what happened. For all we know, it would have even been an unexpected life form that startled her, as discussed among netizens. Doesn't matter what it was, Barbara began ascending way too fast. She skipped the decompression stops that were set up beforehand. From that depth, the pressure difference is brutal. Gas inside the lungs expands violently as pressure drops. Within minutes, she reached the surface. People were there. She was pulled from the water almost immediately. Emergency aid was attempted on shore, but the damage had already been done. Her lungs had ruptured internally, a condition known as pulmonary barotrauma. Oxygen could no longer properly enter her bloodstream. She died shortly afterward, during transport to medical care. Her family later placed a memorial plaque overlooking the Blue Hole, not at the bottom, but above the water, where she last breathed air. Steve, night dive, date unknown. Steve was diving with a close friend at night, a situation that completely changes human perception underwater. At night, there is no ambient light, no visual reference points. The beam of a flashlight becomes your entire world. They descended together and reached below the arch. At some point, they turned off their lights, possibly looking for a bit of adrenaline rush, or possibly for a moment of shared silence. In the complete darkness, time stretches. Steve's partner felt fear creeping in. Not logical fear, but instinctive unease. He turned his flashlight back on first. When looking around for the person he had dived down with, Steve was nowhere to be found. There were no bubbles, no movement, no silhouette drifting upward or downward. The remaining diver searched briefly, then panic overpowered narcosis. He surfaced, believing Steve might have already ascended. When Steve did not surface behind him, reality set in. Rescue attempts began at first light. Divers searched repeatedly. The arch, the walls, the shaft. Nothing. The most likely explanation is that Steve drifted beyond the arch into the open sea, where depth drops away into hundreds of meters. Once there, recovery is impossible. Yuri Lipsky, April 28, 2000. Yuri Lipsky entered the Blue Hole alone, wearing a helmet-mounted camera. At the start, the footage shows calm, controlled breathing, smooth descent. But Yuri had made a critical mistake before entering the water. He was weighted too heavily. As he descended, he began sinking faster than planned. He attempted to compensate by inflating his buoyancy compensator, unaware that pressure was crushing the air inside it. Nitrogen narcosis again set in, dulling his reasoning. The correct response, dropping his weights, never occurred to him. The footage shows his breathing accelerate. His hands shake. He tries to swim upward and doesn't move. He sinks past 100 meters. By 115 meters, his movements slow. Panic gives way to exhaustion. He loses consciousness. No one was nearby. No rescue was possible. When his body was eventually found, there was only a wetsuit and a camera that continued recording, capturing nothing but darkness and his last moments.